Greetings, all warriors of light and future warriors of darkness, and welcome back to another discussion video. The dancer job has always been a really popular job with Final Fantasy fans, and I know that many were disappointed that we didn't get the dancer class when Stormblood came out. But really, can you blame us all for thinking that way when we see Lise dressed like this? Granted, the trailer for it came out long before we knew who she was, and we referred to her as just the Lady in Red, but it felt so obvious at the time that she was going to be a dancer, and it was with great disappointment that it just turned out to be a really cute outfit. But now, with the reveal at the latest fan festival in Tokyo, we finally got it confirmed for us that after all this time, we are getting a dancer job. The applause for seeing the dancer preview was met with cries of excitement and joy, only for them to find out that it was going to be a DPS instead of a healing job. This sparked just as much outrage and disappointment to fans as discovering that Viera were going to be gender-locked to females only. But surely Square Enix had their reasons for doing things this way, didn't they? Wouldn't going through all the trouble to make an entirely new race that we haven't even seen yet in the game was going to be a lot more complicated than taking the Viera and just modeling them to include males, right? And they could include the Hrothgar later on in 6.0 after we get them throughout 5.0. I mean, that's personally what I would have done. I mean, I really do want to think that they had this all planned out for a reason, but honestly, I'm having a hard time trying to think of why. But that's a discussion for another time. Instead, we are going to be looking more into the reasons that they decided to have the dancer as a DPS instead of a healer. Okay, I've been working on a few job discussion videos before, and so this isn't going to be as a complete rundown of the job since we don't really know too much about the dancer yet. What this video is all about is looking back at the dancer job as a whole in the series and see if Square Enix made the right choice to make the dancer in the upcoming Shadowbringers game a DPS instead of a healer. Now, to start things off, we have seen the dancer before, and they were usually females wearing very revealing attire. In fact, in the earliest of the Final Fantasy games, we've had several dancers that were usually seen in pubs, but they were all non-player characters and really there for just kind of comic relief. But typically for the dancer class, they've been using things like daggers or knives as their weapon of choice, and they're capable of using all manner of effects such as white magic, buffing, and debuffing abilities. But their main ability was known as Dance, which often performed actions at random. So you could get something that could either heal or buff your party or deal some sort of damage or to debuff on your party. Aside from seeing the dancing girls in the pubs during the first few games, and even where we had an enemy in the Calabrina dolls who used random effects on their enemies with a skill called Jive, the dancer made its first official job debut in Final Fantasy V as one of the classes obtained from the Earth Crystal Shard. Now, this was a job that let you use various dancing skills to affect your enemy's party in many different ways. In Final Fantasy VI, we had Mog, who was a combination of a dancer and a geomancer. Mog could use the move called Dance, and depending on what type of terrain he was standing on at the time, he could perform all sorts of various random effects. And he also learned new dances by fighting on new terrains as well. In Final Fantasy X too, that's kind of where we got our first real look at what the dancer was capable of. Though in this case it was known as the songstress and was a combination of both bard and dancer. Here, the songstress dances to inflict status ailments and debuffs on enemies, and certain dances could also be found as treasures. In Final Fantasy XI is probably the most well-known of the dancer job, though. They were a mixture of healing and debuffs as well as using daggers in combat like how thieves were able to do. They were the only healing class that didn't rely on magic, and one of the most important NPCs we join forces with is Lillicet, who is kind of the icon when it comes to the dancer in this series. In Final Fantasy XII, we had Penelo, whose most powerful attacks included her dancing, but it's not until Revenant Wings where she becomes an official dancer while learning some things about healing at the same time. So when she used these skills with her white magic and dances, she could inflict major debuffs on enemies and buffs on the party at the same time. So after looking back at all that, while the dancer does have some healing abilities in the series, it's not classified specifically as a healer. Really, if anything, it is classified more as a support DPS. So I guess if you really want to look at it like that, maybe it isn't such a big surprise to the fandom that we get it as a DPS instead of a healer. Granted, I understand. I was also surprised, and I admit I always tended to think of the Dancer as more of a healing job, mostly because we had so many DPS jobs in 14. I mean, for tanks and healers, they can get into the duty finder almost instantly all the time, whereas the DPS, we usually have to wait a lot longer. I mean, for example, I main as a summoner, and when Stormblood first came out, when everyone was running through the dungeons, I had to wait like 20, 30, sometimes even over an hour just to get into a dungeon for the first time. So it was a big hassle, especially since we got 2 DPS jobs with Stormblood and no tanks or healers. I think that everyone was kind of expecting that we would get a new tank and a healer for Shadowbringers. We haven't had a new healer class since Heavensward, and I know that people who main as healers have been waiting for a long time for that. Now, while it is certainly possible that Square Enix can add a healing job later on in a different patch, I think that we may have to keep waiting until 6.0 for another healer. But was making the Dancer class a DPS a smart move on Square Enix's part? Well, from a player's point of view, no. Because, like I said, we have so many DPS jobs and only 3 healers, so it is a bit of a hassle. Granted, they did work a little bit with adjusting the balance when they added the Gunbreaker as a tank, but shouldn't we have had a new healing job by now? Now, for those who are planning to switch their main to a Dancer class, unless they were already a DPS at the time, this could be kind of difficult for them. On the other hand, if by making it into a support DPS job, it is more along the lines of what the Dancer is all about, and it does feel like Square Enix is staying true to the spirit of the Dancer in that sense. In all honesty, I'm not sure if it was a smart move on their part, but when you look at the Dancer's design, you can't help but fall in love with it. I've seen the preview for some of the Dancer's abilities, and I loved what I was seeing so far. More than anything, I guess I'm just glad that we are getting the Dancer at all, especially after years of waiting. In the end, though, I don't think that we should make a hasty judgment of the Dancer without seeing what it can do in battle first. Without knowing completely what it's capable of, I don't think we should try to complain about it. However, I do think that since it will be more of a supporting role, kind of like the Bard, it should have some healing and buffing abilities as well. So in that sense, we still will be able to heal. Such as how we have the Summoner and the Red Mage who can both heal and have raise skills. I think that the Dancer could fall very easily into that category as well. All in all, I would have to say that I'm more surprised than actually disappointed that Dancer was confirmed to be a DPS. But I'm sure that once it all sinks in and we really stop to think about it, maybe it is going to be more natural and true to the idea of what the Dancer is all about by going this route. My advice? I say that we wait for Shadowbringers to come out before making a hasty call. I mean, who knows? The way that the Dancer is set up right now, it could just be right up someone's alley. Anyway, this was just a quick discussion of what I thought of the Dancer class being confirmed of the DPS, and I don't think that people need to be making such a big deal of it just yet. I'm willing to sit and wait for Shadowbringers before deciding if I hate it or not. So I do hope that you all enjoyed this video, and we'll be getting back to another discussion very soon.